So you've written this piece, Once in a Species, and it loosely goes through the development of the human brain, economic scarcity, money, and the birth of Bitcoin. I guess before we kind of start dissecting this thing section by section, do you want to give like just a high level description of what this piece is, why you wrote it, et cetera?
Yeah. So this is kind of building on a fantastic essay called Shelling Out by Nick Szabo, which he wrote in 2002. And in that essay, he lays out the case that all the evidence we see in, caveman cave sites of shell bead jewelry is really proto money. Mm-hmm. So this is our first form of money as a species, that we would have collected these seashells, strung them up, and they would have been valued because it's hard to make more of them. Their seashells are beautiful, and then making a shell bead necklace takes time and energy and skill. It would have taken dozens of hours to make a single necklace, and it would have been very hard to make an additional necklace, especially if you were inland. So that necklace served as a store of value, an asset that was recognized as valuable that you could use in major life events. And Szabo does a fantastic job of laying that out. And he also leaves a few threads unexplored in that piece. He sort of suggests that it's interesting how we don't see shell bead jewelry in Neanderthal cave sites. And it's also interesting that Homo sapiens had 10 times the population density as Neanderthals in their cave sites.
How do they determine that? Is it just artifactual or? Yeah,
so it's in the sediment layers in a cave. You can see like in the timeline when Neanderthals would have been there, and you see the amount of stuff they're producing. Mm-hmm. And then, fast forward a few sediment layers. Now it's Homo sapiens, and there's a lot more stuff being produced, a lot more bones showing up from the amount of food they're eating.
Got it.
So those are interesting disparities between the Neanderthal cave sites and Homo sapiens. And Szabo kind of wonders if perhaps money was a part of that story. And he mostly leaves it there. So what I wanted to do with this piece was update that, because that was over 2 decades ago, and see if there, was any further links that I could expand on that, pull on those threads that he leaves unexplored. And I was kind of surprised by what I found when I sat down and did the research over the last 4 to 6 months. The rabbit hole opened up much bigger than I expected. And I found myself breaking new ground with the hypothesis that I put forward here.
Very cool. I love that piece, by the way, Shelling Out. And when I first got into Bitcoin, it was Nick Szabo's work on smart contracts. It was one of the first like aha moments I had about. Then it was broadly crypto, like a crypto aha moment, but it was leading me towards really the Bitcoin standard and all these other things. So his work is amazing. It's quite dense.
Yes.
Very well cited, like really good work, but definitely.
And I try to follow that lineage too of like, I made sure to go dig up all of his sources and do my homework to make sure I wasn't missing anything. And I pulled on some of his source material for some of my findings.
Yes, that's great. And the anthropology / money crossover is very interesting because it's kind of controversial, right? Like we don't, that's probably why he didn't go into it too much, I suppose.
Yeah, so Szabo lays out this hypothesis that, shell bead jewelry was proto money. And fast forward 20 years and mainstream anthropology has not, absorbed that. They still continue to interpret all of these findings, from over the last 20 years, we've found a lot more examples of shell bead jewelry and new excavations of cave sites. And they always talk about them in terms of like self-expression and personal identity and fashion, and totally miss the economic reality of what this behavior is.
Yeah,
which is very funny. And I think I take some pot shots at anthropology in general in this piece, because it's a shame that if you're trying to understand human behavior with a narrow, siloed version of understanding, then of course you're going to miss out on trying to understand so much of human behavior is driven by economics.
Of course.
And if you're going to try to understand human behavior without economics, good luck.
Right. Yeah, it's well said. It seems like a notable blind spot in any of the social sciences. They sort of ignore the economic component unless you're really in Austrian economics. And I'd say even the Keynesian economics, they ignore the economic component because it's just kind of bullshit the way they construct their models. Yeah,
I think that's kind of the just like two dings against Szabo and also I guess my work here of the anthropologists only want to focus on what's orthodox in anthropology, and then if you want to talk about economics, well, it's especially taboo to talk about Austrian economics because that's not accepted by economics at all. So sorry, economists.
No, that's a good point. And I think about this a lot, that economics is maybe not the youngest science. I guess computer science might be the youngest science now, but prior to computer science, economics is, as when Mises was writing in the 1940s, he often called economics the youngest science.
Yeah.
So, it's very early, basically, in kind of the grand scale of its evolutionary path, especially when you look at something like, well, even anthropology or psychology. Psychology goes all the way back into astrology, for instance. Jung said that was like the collective knowledge we had on psychology up until a point was contained in astrology, for instance. So like economics is a good proxy for this. Like until the mid 1800s, people thought that value was an objective thing in the world, right? They used to talk about the util as like, this bottle has 17 utils and this phone has 80 utils. Therefore, this phone is more valuable than the bottle. Whereas in fact, we know now that it's all subjective preference, somewhat obviously. So I try to remember that we're contending with that. I often say we're coming out of the economic dark ages.
Yeah.
So it's unsurprising to see that a lot of these other disciplines just have this as a blind spot. And maybe you see this at the individual level, right? That even talking about money is somewhat taboo.
Yep.
So maybe there's like a generality associated with that into scientific disciplines.
Yeah. And I think it's part of what's so interesting about trying to understand Bitcoin too. And the real motivation for this piece is to try to put Bitcoin in the context of monetary history, and also to try to help explain, like, why are we so drawn to Bitcoin? Like, what is it about Bitcoin scarcity in particular that's so compelling to us? And, I think this piece does a good job of landing on like possibly a root driver for that, for that tendency. And, that it's economics at the end of the day. And it's kind of remarkable that we've had, for all of human history, going back hundreds of thousands of years, we haven't understood the economics of what's driving, how our species is played out and how our lives are oriented. And now Bitcoin kind of lands on the scene and forces us to try to like make sense of why am I personally choosing to divert my 401k into internet funny money, and I'm quite confident that is a better choice than the default. And it forces you to try to learn about economics, Austrian economics, in order to make sense of that instinct.
Yes. Yeah. As you're saying, I don't know why this came up. It's like as if once you start to grok Austrian economics or the origins of money, as you'll go into, you start to get a new interpretive layer or interpretive structure through which to interpret reality, right? Historically. So there's this saying that, sometimes you catch a criminal and a whole string of crimes is solved. It's like, I think when you start to look through the money lens at history and from a praxeological standpoint of individual human action, things start to make a lot more sense. Like intuition and rationality kind of find some middle ground, I suppose. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.